What's going to happen at my immigration interview? Hello, my name's Nadine Shitta. I'm an immigration attorney based in Houston, Texas, and I've worked with couples from all over the United States helping them ace their marriage interviews. So I'll go over some tips and tricks for the interview and what types of common questions to prepare for. So, the number one thing is the officers are very formal. They are not your friends. Think of it less as an interview and more as an interrogation. The first thing that happens when you go in the interview is that you swear in, and then the interview proceeds. So, don't be alarmed at how formal they treat you at the beginning, and you'll be fine. Number two, silence is your friend. If you don't know the answer to a question, don't make up the answer. Some questions are designed to test your veracity or your truth-telling ability, so don't risk it by making something up because lying is going to get you in a lot of trouble. Also, never ever interrupt the officers or talk too much. They're professionals. They ask questions in a certain order, and talking over them is a really good way to aggravate them. And then lastly, know the details of your spouse's immigration history. I say this because they tend to be a little bit more aggressive with couples where somebody has fallen out of status or has had previous applications filled out for them in the past. So what are they actually going to ask me about? Some of these interviews are quick, 5 minutes, and some can last over an hour, just depending on the officer. They ask different types of questions, and I like to group those under different umbrellas. Each officer has his own way of handling the interview, and he could zigzag between the different categories, more or less. But they ask usually the same questions. Number one thing is they ask about the application itself. So review what you've written down. Review the affidavits that people have written for you. Of course, your spouse's immigration history. During this part, they'll ask questions. They want to know if you know each other's birthdays, middle names, previous names, different states that you lived in. Of course, your address. Basically, anything in the application is fair game. And most important to note here is that they'll ask you about each other's answers. So review what your spouse has written in the application. Now, this is the bulk of the interview. They'll ask you about your relationship. The number one question they always ask is, how did you meet? Make sure you and your spouse are on the same page as far as dates, how you met, and location. Because one spouse might have an idea about how things started and when they actually started, and somebody might not really have known, oh, that's when it started. So they'll ask about the engagement, whose idea it was to get married, who paid for the fees for the application, whose idea was it to do the application, where was the last vacation you went on, where was your honeymoon, and where do you plan on having a honeymoon. Make sure that you also know how you spent all the last major holidays. Valentine's Day and New Year's Eve are usually big ones. Most importantly, they'll ask about your family. So what's your relationship like with your own family, your spouse's family? Can you name all the siblings? Their spouses, parents. When was the last time you had contact with them? Okay, so the second huge umbrella is habits. They want to know how well do you know your spouse. So commonly they'll ask who drove here this morning, who made breakfast, who normally makes breakfast, what time does your spouse wake up? What does their work week look like? What are their work hours? What are their grooming practices? Who showered first this morning? Who makes the bed? Who's messier? What type of shampoo does your wife use? All these little details. Always know what religious practices your spouse adheres to. So with couples from, even if you have the same religion, but with couples from different backgrounds, they know about different religions. They know exactly what to ask you. So something to make sure about is if your spouse is from a different religion, ask them what practices do they actually follow, because they could ask your spouse, does your spouse go to a temple, and they don't go to a temple? Or does your spouse pray 5 times a day? Does your spouse eat pork? So just because somebody follows a certain religion does not necessarily mean that they follow all of its practices. So it's really important here to just be honest about what you know about your spouse's religious practices. Also, do you incorporate any cultural practices in your household? Do you have certain types of decor, for example? Finances is another one. It's a pretty straightforward one, though. Like usually, where does your spouse work? What's their boss's name? Like, how much does your spouse get paid? How often? Where does that money go? The last big purchase that you made, and the last big gift that you guys got each other. And lastly, they're going to ask you about your future. If you don't have a house, do you plan on buying one? Or do you like your apartment? Do you want to stay there? Do you plan on moving soon? Do you plan on living in the same state? If you don't have children, do you plan on having children? And with that one, they might follow up with, what type of birth control are you using? So the last thing, and I can't emphasize this enough, really, is that if you don't know, don't make it up, because if they catch you in a lie, that's just not good. And we want you to win this thing. If you need someone to help prep you for the interview, we're happy to set up a consultation with you and your spouse. If you're in Houston, we're happy to attend the interview with you as well. It's been a pleasure introducing this to you. Give us a call if you have any questions.